So there are two parts to the lesser omentum. You've got a medial and a lateral part. So the medial part is called the Hepato-Gastric ligament, and this runs between the stomach and the liver. So hepato, liver, gastric, stomach. And the lateral part is called the Hepato-Duodenal ligament. So hepato, liver, duodenal referring to duodenum. So this passes between the duodenum and the liver. So I've just switched back to this diagram and I'll show you what we've just talked about. So we've got the liver at the top, we've got the attachment to the inferior surface of the diaphragm, so this is the superior layer of the coronary ligament, and you've got this attachment a little bit further down and on the posterior aspect of the liver. So this is the inferior layer of the coronary ligament which attaches it to the diaphragm above, and these are the peritoneal reflections from the diaphragm. So at the porta hepatis, the peritoneum meets, the visceral peritoneum meets, and it forms this double layer of peritoneum which runs to the stomach, to the lesser curvature of the stomach. So this is the lesser omentum. So at the stomach, the double layer of peritoneum splits, so one side of the peritoneum goes around one side of the stomach and the other side goes around the other side of the stomach to completely enclose the stomach in peritoneum. So coming back to this 3D model, we've got the liver enclosed in peritoneum except for the bare area on the posterior surface. And I've just drawn the falciform ligaments and the coronary ligaments at the top. And then the peritoneum meets at the porta hepatis and extends to the lesser curvature of the stomach, and it splits around the stomach to completely enclose the stomach. So the stomach is completely enclosed in peritoneum. And then the two layers of peritoneum which split at the lesser curvature to encapsulate the stomach meet again at the greater curvature, and they form this double layer of peritoneum again. So this is called the greater omentum, and this attaches to the greater curve of the stomach. And this greater omentum hangs down like a sort of apron, and it covers the intestinal loops. So it hangs down like this, covering the intestinal loops, and it's called the greater omentum. So just to show you in diagrammatic form, the greater omentum is this bit here, which hangs down in front of the loops of the intestine, the small intestine, and it's this double layered fold of peritoneum. So you've got the lesser omentum up here, which is a double fold, splits around the stomach and encapsulates it completely, and then you've got the greater omentum coming from the greater curvature, hanging down in front of the loops of the small intestine, and it folds back in on itself and upwards, and it wraps around the transverse colon. So behind the lesser omentum and this stomach, you've got this thing called the lesser sac, or the omental bursa, and this is shaded in blue in this diagram. So this lesser sac extends downwards behind the stomach and between the layers of this greater omentum. So you've got this anterior fold of greater omentum, double fold, and you've got this U-bend, and it rises up again, and you've got this posterior fold which attaches around the transverse colon. So the lesser sac extends between these two folds of greater omentum. So I've switched over to another diagram, a horizontal section, and this shows the boundaries of the lesser sac. So we're looking superiorly down at a cross section, and you can see the stomach here, and to the left you've got the spleen, and slightly posteriorly. So the lesser sac is this bit outlined in blue, sitting behind the stomach, and you can see that it on the left margins of the lesser sac are made up by these attachments between the stomach and the spleen, and also between the spleen and the posterior abdominal wall. So this peritoneal attachment between the spleen and the stomach, which makes up the left wall of the lesser sac, is called the gastrosplenic ligament. or the gastrolienal ligament, and this attaches the greater curvature to the hilum of the spleen. And at the back you've got the lienorenal ligament, and this attaches the hilum of the spleen back to the posterior abdominal wall. So it just covers a bit of the surface of the kidney. So you've got the gastrosplenic or the gastrolienal ligament, and you've got the lienorenal ligament, which form the left wall of the lesser sac. So the lesser sac here in blue. So the lesser sac actually communicates with the greater sac via a little foramen called the foramen of Winslow, or the epiploic foramen. So you can see the area where this foramen is located. So anterior to the foramen of Winslow, you've got the lesser omentum containing the portal triad. So the portal triad consists of the hepatic artery, the bile duct, and the portal vein. And just behind the foramen of Winslow, you've got the inferior vena cava. And then inferiorly, you've got the first part of the duodenum, and superiorly, you've got the caudate process of the liver, which isn't shown on this particular diagram. So coming back to the transverse colon, which is where we left off, it's encapsulated by peritoneum. So the greater omentum splits and surrounds the transverse colon. And the transverse colon is tethered to the posterior abdominal wall by a double fold of peritoneum called a mesentery. So a mesentery is a double fold of visceral peritoneum which anchors a viscera to the posterior abdominal wall. So you can see this double fold extending towards the posterior abdominal wall like this. So when this mesentery reaches the posterior abdominal wall, the upper part and lower part separate. So the upper part splits and passes superiorly and reflects back again onto the liver, like so. And the lower part passes inferiorly on the posterior abdominal wall. So this mesentery, which attaches the transverse colon to the posterior abdominal wall, is called the transverse mesocolon. So as we follow the peritoneum inferiorly, there's another mesentery which encapsulates the small intestines, and this mesentery is called the mesentery of the small intestine. So this mesentery wraps around the small intestine from the duodenojejunal flexure down to the ileocecal junction. And this mesentery suspends the small intestine in the peritoneal cavity. And then you've got a fine mesentery which surrounds the sigmoid colon, and this is called the sigmoid mesocolon. So it's not shown in this model, but it's further down, and it suspends the sigmoid colon within the visceral peritoneum. So these mesenteries, together with the greater and lesser omenta, carry vascular supply and lymphatic drainage to the viscera and from the viscera. So what we've looked at is we've taken a trip through the peritoneal cavity, looking at the peritoneal attachments. So we've seen how the liver is attached to the anterior abdominal wall by the falciform ligament. We've seen how the parietal peritoneum surrounds the whole peritoneal cavity, and at the top we looked at how the peritoneum reflects from the inferior surface of the diaphragm onto the liver via these coronary ligaments. So you've got an upper or superior or anterior coronary ligament and a lower inferior or posterior coronary ligament which reflects from the diaphragm and surrounds the liver in this peritoneum. And then we saw how the peritoneum meets at the porta hepatis to form this double fold which forms the lesser omenta and joins the liver to the lesser curvature of the stomach. And we saw how the stomach was entirely encapsulated by this fold of peritoneum, and at the greater curvature the peritoneum fuses again to form another double fold called the greater omentum, which loops down and covers the intestinal loops in this double fold, and then it joins on to the transverse colon and surrounds that in a layer of peritoneum. The transverse colon is then suspended in the peritoneal cavity by a mesentery. So the mesentery attaches the transverse colon to the posterior abdominal wall. So the upper part of the mesentery passes back up and reflects back onto the liver, and the lower part passes inferiorly on the posterior abdominal wall and forms other mesenteries. So it forms the mesentery of the small intestine, and it forms the mesentery of the sigmoid colon. So behind the peritoneum you've got structures like the pancreas, and you've got the second to fourth parts of the duodenum, which are retroperitoneal. So only one part of their surface is in contact with the peritoneum. So other retroperitoneal structures are the ascending colon and the descending colon, and also you've got the kidneys, which are retroperitoneal structures.